We grow up believing the air is just there, a background feature of reality too basic to question. We worry about wars, pandemics, financial collapse, but almost never ask whether the one thing every breath quietly assumes, oxygen, is really untouchable. So imagine a world where, without warning, oxygen disappears for exactly 60 seconds. 1 minute. Not a myth, not exaggeration, but a precise, global, synchronized absence. The unsettling part isn't only the chaos that would follow. It's what this scenario reveals about who, or what, actually holds our survival in its hands. If you're here for comforting answers, this is the wrong place. Here, we take what everyone treats as obvious, pull it apart, and ask the questions that almost never get said out loud. The idea that the planet could lose its oxygen for 1 minute quasi always appears as internet trivia, animated shorts, fast what-if posts with lines like "everyone would die" or "the world would explode," followed by a comment section full of jokes. The theory drops in, collects a quick "wow, that's crazy," and disappears before anyone has to sit with it. The rare people who push the thought further are dismissed as dramatizing basic science, as if thinking too serially about it were some kind of social mistake. But precisely because it's treated like a throwaway curiosity, it becomes useful, not to predict tomorrow, but to expose what our civilization does not like to face. Scientists, when confronted with the question, tend to answer quickly. That's impossible. The physics doesn't work that way. There is no natural mechanism for an instant, global removal of oxygen. And within the rules, we know they are right. There is no known natural process that switches atmospheric oxygen off and then back on like a lamp. But the purpose of this thought experiment is not to forecast a weather report. It's to map the fault lines in our dependence on something we never negotiated, the assumption that the air will behave. To keep this from turning into pure fantasy, we need rules. We are not imagining every oxygen atom in every molecule vanishing from existence. Water does not disintegrate. Rocks do not turn to dust. DNA does not collapse in real time. Instead, picture something more focused and disturbingly neat. All free atmospheric oxygen, the O2 gas we breathe and that feeds every flame, disappears for exactly 60 seconds, everywhere at once. The rest of the atmosphere stays. Nitrogen remains, carbon dioxide remains. The oxygen bound inside water, minerals and biological molecules stays where it is. Only the breathable oxygen in the air is switched off. After 1 minute, it returns with the same concentration it had antes, as if nothing had happened. Even with that limitation, this is not a small disturbance. It is a direct strike at the foundation of life and of every system designed on the quiet premise that the air will not suddenly change its mind. And this is where the lazy explanation, "people just hold their breath, and then it's fine," begins to crack. A healthy adult at rest can usually go 60 seconds without breathing. Uncomfortable, but doable. That's in controlled conditions, knowing what's happening, maybe submerged in a pool, counting in their head. Our scenario is not that. This minute falls on pilots in descent, on surgeons mid-incision, on workers lifting heavy loads, on factory employees in suffocating heat, on people already short of breath from asthma, heart disease, pollution, or altitude. The same 60 seconds means radically different things depending on where and how it finds you. It's not a global breath-holding contest. It's the world being forced to suffocate at random. When oxygen leaves the air, it doesn't just abandon our lungs, it abandons fire. Every open flame starves in seconds. Candles, gas stoves, welding torches, industrial furnaces, power plant burners, all snuffed out almost at once. Every active wildfire around the planet, burning through forest or city, suddenly loses its fuel. The image is almost heroic. In one mysterious minute, every major fire on Earth is strangled. Satellite images would show bright scars of flame dimming into darkness. For some, it would look like a miracle. But in complex systems, there is no such thing as a consequence that is only good. If every dangerous fire dies, every necessary flame dies too. And when things come back, they do not return cleanly. A less obvious effect is the sudden change in partial pressure. Remove oxygen from air, and you change its composition and the way it behaves. The body, tuned to a certain distribution of gases, suddenly finds itself in something closer to high-altitude conditions without having moved a step. Ears burst or ache. Some people collapse faster than others. Pressurized systems, from airplane cabins to sealed storage units, feel the difference through sensors that were never built to interpret "oxygen is gone." Alarms start shouting that something is fundamentally wrong, but offer no explanation. Then you reach the places where fire isn't optional. Refineries rely on carefully controlled combustion. So do many power plants, chemical factories, metal works. These operations sit on the edge between precise reaction and disaster. When oxygen disappears, their systems choke, shut off, trip safeguards. Valves slam shut. Control software scrambles to figure out whether to protect equipment or output. For 60 seconds, the world's industrial heart has its fuel stolen. And after 60 seconds, oxygen comes back into a world that is out of sync. In some facilities, unburned gas has accumulated. In others, cooling systems initiated emergency routines not meant to be stopped halfway. Somewhere, a spark finds a newly unstable mixture. The moment of silence becomes a delayed chain of explosions, failures, and toxic releases. We picture the catastrophe in the minute, without air. But the real danger might unfold when the air returns. Up in the sky, the stakes go from theoretical to immediate. Jet engines, fundamentally, are machines for compressing air, mixing it with fuel, and igniting it. No oxygen, no combustion. High above the ground, in the cold and thin atmosphere, passenger jets suddenly find their engines starving. Some can briefly glide. Pilots are trained for engine failure, but they are not trained for a scenario in which every engine on every aircraft on the planet is trying to fail at almost the same time, without warning. Cockpits fill with alarms. Automatic systems detect the impossible. Loss of thrust without mechanical damage. Pilots try restarts, checklist after checklist, while their own bodies start to feel the lack of oxygen in cabin air. Emergency oxygen masks deploy. But here, the fine print becomes brutal. Many aircraft emergency systems rely on chemical oxygen generation that still needs ambient conditions to operate properly, and on crew who can move and think. In a 1-minute global choke, some aircraft level off and survive. Others don't. On the ground, hospitals become the quiet epicenter of the most unforgiving outcomes. It is not the metal cylinder of oxygen that disappears. Chemically, it still exists. The hardware is intact, but the environment it was designed to support stops cooperating. Ventilators pull in air to mix with stored oxygen. Anesthesia machines assume that when they push gases into lungs, those gases carry a specific ratio of oxygen. During those 60 seconds, every assumption is wrong. Patients under deep anesthesia teeter on a narrow line even in normal conditions. Their breathing is already compromised by design. That extra minute of true absence, not low oxygen, not poor quality air, but zero usable oxygen, is enough to push some from recoverable to never waking up. Intensive care units, neonatal wards, emergency rooms already handling crises find themselves abruptly stripped of the one invisible resource they can't replace with skill or improvisation. Now move into places that never make it into neat disaster infographics. Traffic tunnels full of cars, crowded subways between stations, mines deep underground, submarines close to the surface, cramped factory floors where ventilation is bad even on normal days. People in these spaces already live closer to their physical limits. A single minute without oxygen is amplified by heat, stress, pre-existing illnesses, and the simple fact that many of these environments have no fast escape routes. Some collapse and are rescued later. Some are not. It's tempting to say, the minute passes, oxygen returns, the survivors gasp, panic floods the news for a few hours, and then the world moves on. That story is clean, and it fits the way we like crises to be. Loud, visible, then resolved. But that's not how this would work. The first wave is bodies, crashes, fires, systems failing. The second wave is something harder to quantify, the collapse of trust in the background of reality. Every government, every institution that depends on the appearance of control would be forced to answer a question that should never exist. What can turn breathing off for exactly 60 seconds, and then put it back? The easiest narrative, and the one most leaders would reach for first, would be to label it as a rare atmospheric anomaly, an event with no sign of recurrence, a freak coincidence. It sounds reassuring. It suggests that the best response is to grieve, rebuild, and carry on. But the event itself refuses to fit that explanation. A global effect, simultaneous, affecting all accessible atmosphere, lasting not 52 or 74 seconds, but one clean minute, then reversing with surgical precision. It doesn't behave like chaos. It behaves like intention. That's the inflection point where a harmless hypothetical crosses into territory that makes security planners, intelligence agencies, and defense strategists deeply uncomfortable. Because once you entertain the idea, not declare it true, just consider it, that something could target the planet's oxygen in this way, you are no longer talking about a natural disaster. You are talking about a capability. If such a capability existed, who would ever admit it? A force able to turn oxygen off, even locally and briefly, would not need armies. It would not need nukes, aircraft carriers, or satellite constellations. It would control the most intimate part of human vulnerability, the gap between one breath and the next. A demonstration wouldn't need to be global. A single, localized minute over one hostile city, one strategic base, one capital, would be enough to send a message that no conventional weapon can match. Imagine a government receiving evidence, not speculation, not rumor, that some actor has used or tested such a tool on a small scale. An unexplained event in a remote region. People collapse, birds drop, engines fail, and then life resumes as if nothing happened. Sensors show a drop in oxygen out of line with any known phenomenon. The data is there, and it's undeniable to those who see it. What happens next is predictably ugly. Secrecy, frantic analysis, desperate attempts to replicate or counteract the effect, and above all, containment of the narrative. Because this is the dangerous part. Once the public understands that breathing itself might be subject to manipulation, the entire hierarchy of fear changes. Nuclear weapons, cyber attacks, climate events, all remain serious, but they move down a notch. At the top sits a new, almost mythic threat: the ability to simply withdraw air. No city needs to be destroyed, no infrastructure needs to be bombed. Just a pause, a minute-long reminder that life can be interrupted without leaving a crater. The political reaction to the global minute, even if it were a one-time fluke, would be shaped by that fear. Publicly, leaders would talk about unity, resilience, preparedness. They would promise investigations, cooperation with scientists, investment in atmospheric research. Privately, the conversations would be much colder. Who might have done this? Who might gain? How close are we to doing it ourselves? And if we can't, how do we negotiate with whoever can? Markets would not wait for answers. The risk models that underpin everything from airline insurance to energy futures are built on a set of assumed constants. One of them is that oxygen levels don't just vanish and return on human timescales. The minute tears that assumption in half. Stocks tied to aviation, heavy industry, high-risk urban infrastructure might experience a shock that isn't just about immediate losses, but about the possibility of recurrence. Investment would flood into anything promising control or prediction of atmospheric anomalies, no matter how speculative. And in the gaps opened by confusion, other actors would move. Companies would appear overnight offering oxygen security, new types of personal masks, sealed room systems, proprietary filters claiming to protect against environmental disruptions. Governments, under pressure to do something, might quietly subsidize some of these, not because they deeply believe in them, but because visible action calms panic. Opportunists would monetize the minute's trauma in 100 ways. But the deeper unease sits at the level of ordinary people who lived through it. You are at work, or on a bus, or on a call, and suddenly drawing air gives you nothing. The body doesn't receive a pop-up saying oxygen temporarily unavailable. It just senses a void. Instinct takes over. You gasp, you feel the rising pressure in your chest, you see others around you clutching at their throats, eyes wide, lips turning pale. 60 seconds is a lifetime inside your own fear. Some people black out. Some watch others fall. For the rest of their lives, many will never again experience breathing as something entirely safe. When danger is visible, an enemy, a weapon, a storm on the horizon, there's at least a story to attach to it. You can blame, resist, or bargain. When the danger is the sudden disobedience of air, blame floats upward into the abstract. Some will look to God, others to aliens, others to secret labs, shadow governments, experimental geoengineering gone wrong. The human mind refuses to sit with "we don't know" for long. It fills the silence with whatever pattern feels least intolerable. The official response, of course, will not endorse any of these. The safer route is to keep the event inside a vocabulary that soothes anomaly, rare, non-recurring, understudy. Experts will be put on camera to explain possibilities in terms simple enough not to scare, complex enough not to be easily questioned. And almost inevitably, voices that push interpretations involving deliberate action or hidden technologies will be marginalized, blocked, or rebranded as harmful. That doesn't require a classic conspiracy with secret rooms and villain monologues. It only requires overlapping incentives. Media organizations fear spreading panic. Platforms fear being blamed for instability. States fear admitting vulnerability they don't know how to fix. Companies fear liability. Together, without any grand plan, they create an environment where only certain explanations are allowed to breathe. Meanwhile, in classified briefings and private labs, the question nobody wants to say out loud in public is examined in every possible way. Could this be reproduced? Not by nature, but by us. Could directed energy, exotic physics, orbital infrastructure, or some unknown mechanism focus on the bonds that keep oxygen molecules intact in air and disrupt them temporarily? On paper, it sounds absurd. Still, You can be sure someone would be paid to work through the math, explore the fringes, chase rumors of enemies doing the same. History is blunt on this point. Whenever a new category of power appears, something that can change the balance between nations overnight, it does not get handed out fairly. It concentrates, first in the hands of those already well-positioned to seize it, then, slowly, in weaker copies for others, if they're lucky. If the minute revealed even a rumor of a practical path toward atmospheric manipulation, you can predict who would be invited into that conversation. It would not be you. At this stage, the thought experiment stops being comfortable. It stops being about what would happen to our bodies, and starts being about what would happen to our systems. A 1-minute loss of oxygen would kill people, damage infrastructure, trigger accidents. That part is gruesome, but straightforward. The more dangerous impact is conceptual, the realization that something we took as beyond negotiation might, in fact, be subject to terms we don't set. That realization alone is enough to change how power operates. Imagine diplomatic talks held between states who suspect that one side may, one day, gain partial control over air itself. How does that change the tone? Defense treaties, once centered on nuclear deterrence and mutual surveillance, would quietly add new pillars addressing environmental integrity and atmospheric security, wrapped in bland language that hides what's at stake. A new layer of secrecy would form around any research that even smells like it could touch oxygen at scale. Those who haven't kept up in this new race would find themselves negotiating from a position of permanent anxiety. They wouldn't know whether the next crisis, a mass blackout, a regional infrastructure failure, a spike in unexplained deaths, is just bad luck, or the subtle demonstration of a hand that can squeeze the sky for a moment and let go. Once that suspicion exists, it colors everything. And yet, for the majority of people, daily life would need to go on. You still commute, you still work, you still breathe. Governments, institutions, even many scientists would have a strong interest in restoring the feeling that air is just air. That the minute was a freak, or better yet, that its details are too unclear to worry about. Talk of it would gradually fade from headlines, then from official speeches. It might turn into an annual memorial, a day of remembrance for those who died, stripped of any reference to the deeper questions. The story gets domesticated. That's often what happens with events that threaten the narrative core of a civilization. Instead of integrating the terrifying possibility, we sand it down into something we can hold. The underlying risk remains, barely addressed, because fully facing it would require admitting how little control we actually have. So what really happens if the world loses oxygen for 1 minute? On the surface, a catalog of horrors: fainting spells, crashes, failed surgeries, industrial accidents, planes downed, lives cut short at random. Those are the immediate visible scars. But the deeper answer is quieter and more corrosive. The minute rips away the illusion that some layers of reality are guaranteed. It shows that our systems, economic, political, technological, are built on foundations we rarely audit, and that if someone, somewhere, could tamper with those foundations, almost every other form of power would become secondary. Perhaps that's why this scenario, when it appears, is almost always reduced to a sensational line and a joke. To treat it seriously is to step into a space where traditional comfort phrases stop working. No one can promise with absolute certainty that the mechanisms of our world will never surprise us at that scale. No one can guarantee that nobody is trying to get closer to that kind of leverage. And no one in a position of authority wants to stand in front of a camera and say, We do not fully understand how safe the air is. So the topic is kept at arm's length. Fun enough for clicks, too destabilizing for real debate. But the question lingers underneath, whether spoken or not. If one day the air went away for a single minute and then came back, would that minute be treated as an accident to forget? Or as a message from something or someone that doesn't feel the need to explain itself? And more unsettling still, if anyone ever does gain the ability to play with the line between breath and no breath, do you honestly believe you'll be among the first to know, or among the last to figure it out, when the next minute arrives?